gente, calma, alma do Benfica. É para ver que fizemos o ano todo. Vamos, caralho! E quem manda nessa porra aqui somos nós. Vamos, caralho!
Pega Benfica, rumo ao Marquês. Eu amo o Benfica. 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 Hoje vamos mostrar a nossa garra. De 3 em 3 ninguém nos para. Vamos mais alto voar. Todos com querer e ambição. Temos tudo na nossa mão. Eu quero ser campeão. Estádio cheio e hoje nós vamos ganhar. Não há outra forma senão apoiar. Esta força só aqui se vê. É o SLB. Eu amo o Benfica. 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 Eu amo o Benfica.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to another episode of Cantinho Benfiquista podcast. Number 154. Is the sky falling? For many, it is, but we'll find out if for us it is. As always, your host, Mike. I am joined today by Bill, Oscar, and Kenny, and Jason. Have other things scheduled. I know we haven't been here for 2 weeks. I was traveling. I was overseas to Portugal. I caught the Sociedad game. And then last week there was some conflicting schedules, so we weren't able to be here. But we had the Portuguese podcast earlier today with Luis and the boys. And here we are with the English version with myself and Bill. Bill, how are you?
Doing good. Back on the winning run, so it's can't complain right now.
Train was a little derailed for a little bit. Hopefully we're back on the tracks for a long time. We got a lot to cover today. A lot has happened since we were last here, between Champions League, the debacle there. Some will say the debacle in the Portuguese league. I wouldn't say it that way, but we'll get into that. We'll talk about Roger Schmidt. There's a lot of fans against him, and to be curious to kind of get your thoughts. And then we'll look ahead at, what's to come in the next couple of weeks. We got Chaves away this weekend. We have next week away to Sociedad, and then we have Sporting at home, which will be an important match. So the next 3 games, 4 if you count Inter, which is right after that, 4 very important critical games for us, which could really dictate kind of what the rest of the season looks like. Before we get started, don't forget, if you're tuning in on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube or Twitch as well, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow us. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button or hit that thumbs up button. Subscribe, hit the bell so you get notifications when we go live. It doesn't cost you anything. It takes you about 2 seconds to do it, and we appreciate it. Hopefully we can get to 1,000 subscribers, which then will unlock a variety of different features for us. So again, if you could just do us that favor, like, follow, subscribe, even if you don't use YouTube. If you have an account, just give us a subscribe, give us a like. We'd appreciate it. I also wanted to mention, we had, as most of you know, or many of you may know, we do the Sonho Benfiquista, which is, I have 2 season tickets, the Red Pass Total, for myself and my son. And this weekend we had a young girl, Liliana, and her sister, Patricia, at the game against Casa Pia. It was her first time, and she sent us some videos and some pictures, and the little girl was extremely excited. I think she's maybe 9 or 7 around there. But it feels good to, even though sometimes the results might not be great, it feels good to at least know that we as a group are able to contribute in some way, shape, or form to that next generation, or even some people who are older who have taken advantage of the opportunity to go and sit in our seats and watch a game for the first time. So, and then this coming home game against Sporting, I don't know if you remember, Bill, but when Benfica played Basel in the preseason, there was a little boy in the front row. I want to say it was like 4 or 5. He had a sign that was saying it was his first time watching Benfica. And I commented on the picture on social media to get a hold of his dad. And his dad actually reached out to me. They live in Switzerland, and they're flying to Portugal to watch the game. So it'll be his first game at the Benfica Stadium for the little boy. And he's flying from Switzerland, and we're going to give him our tickets. So it'll be pretty cool.
That's awesome. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. So pretty excited about that. So, all right, let's get into this. So, and again, those of you who are tuning in, please let us know your thoughts, add some comments, engage in the conversation. It's always fun to keep it interactive. So tell us if you agree with us, if you think we're idiots. We accept that too. Let's talk about it. By no means are we right and you're wrong, and vice versa, but it's always good to kind of debate and see what everyone's point of view is. So Benfica played yesterday against Aroca for the Taça Liga in the second jornada. We didn't feature in the first jornada because the format of this tournament is stupid, if you ask me, which is weird, right? We win one game and we basically like 1 foot in the next stage, or I think it's the final 4, which is wild to me. Like, you literally play 2 games and you're in the final 4. But again, that's nor here nor there. Benfica beats Aroca 2-0, which puts Benfica in first place of that group with 3 points, 2 goal difference, positive 2 goal difference. Aroca is now in second place with a -1 goal difference. And AVS, which is, I believe they're leaders of the second league right now. They are in last place with 0 points. And we play AVS in November at some point at home. And basically, we could lose by 1 and we'd still go through. Obviously, we want to win the game, but again, it's weird. But I don't necessarily want to talk too much about the game in itself, because it wasn't very exciting. I think the main talking point here is obviously the formation and the starting 11. Just to call up here, so in terms of our starting 11 for this game, we had Trubin in goal. We had a back 3 of Antonio Silva, Otamendi, and Morato. And then we had a midfield of Auschwitz, João Neves, Florentino, and João Mario. And then up top, we had Di Maria, Rafa, and Gonçalo Guedes, who returns to the starting 11. A lot of people were confused. A lot of people were like, oh, it's a back 4 with Auschwitz on the right and Morato on the left. Most of the diagrams that you see out there show that back 4. And I couldn't wrap my head around it, right? Like, it makes... I get Morato can play on the left because he's left-footed, but if you have Jurasek and Bernat on the bench and you're putting Morato as a left, like, that for me would have been the clear indicator, like, Roger Schmidt has completely lost
he's lost his shit.
But lo and behold, as you saw in the game, it was a back 3. Tried a different formation. Tell me, were you surprised? Did you like it? Do you think it's something that we can maintain, or do you think it was more just kind of like shaking things up? Like, how do you see this?
So I liked the formation change, right? Like, things haven't been going our way. We haven't been playing to the caliber that we were playing last year. That cleared everyone. We have a few injuries. I'm always a big proponent of having a plan B, right? Like, if things aren't working with what your normal day-to-day plan is, have a plan B. Have something
you can't
can
do the
switch up
same
to.
thing over and over
Right.
and expect a different
Like, if
outcome.
exactly. And we've seen in games this season where, and I've mentioned it in our group chat tons of times, where we get outnumbered in midfield, right? Only having 2 centrally, even though like João Mario or Freddie are playing on the wing, but pinch in, like, you're still getting outnumbered because the center guys are getting stretched out wide to kind of cover for Di Maria or Neres, because they don't defend as much. With this type of formation, defending, you essentially have 5, right? Going forward, the guys that are playing, in this case, it was Freddie and and it seemed
Jean
like
Neves.
Jean Neves, which I was a little surprised about because I thought maybe Jean Mario would be the one wide, but
Yeah,
kind of
Jean
makes
Neves
sense.
played. Jean Neves played that right side in a friendly game against Burnley, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken, in the preseason.
And he's got more pace than than
Correct.
Jean Mario.
Yes.
But going forward, those guys can pinch in. Even defending, those guys can pinch in a bit because you have the three center backs in the back. So you're overloading the midfield, which then gives us a quicker chance of getting the ball back and keep possession, right? And I think the type of players we have, I think it's a formation that we can fit into, right? It could even be a plan A depending on who we're playing, right? In a game like yesterday against 90% of the league, we're going to have a shit ton of possession, right? And that formation is going to lead to more people going forward, kind of more lap and runs. And I think we have some of
more
the players,
stability as well in the midfield.
right? And I think we have players that fit that formation that could work, and we have guys that are injured right now that when back flourish in that type of system, right? If you look at someone like Koksu, right, if you throw him in the midfield, he doesn't have to defend as much. Then he can do what he naturally does, is go forward, and he's better going forward than a number 6, right? And I think that having those options of we can play with 4 in the back, we can play 3 at the back, we can play Koksu in the middle, we can play him out wide, John Neves can play in the middle. Like even during the game, you can just rotate, and that makes it almost impossible for a team to defend when you're just guy starts out on the right, next thing you know he's on the left, next thing you know he's in the middle. Like you can just, it's more free flowing. And I thought yesterday there were moments that we looked like the team we did last year, where we were moving the ball quick, and it was 1-2 quick short passes, and the team was making those the diagonal runs.
And not to mention, not to cut you off, but not to mention that field was in terrible condition.
I was literally just about to say we were doing that even though the field was horrendous.
Yeah,
it felt like every time someone planted a foot, a huge chunk of that grass was coming up.
Yeah, it was a disaster.
I mean, you could tell by the end of that game the condition of the guys were playing and what wasn't the best, and our performance, I think, toward the end of the game kind of dropped off a bit, and I think it had to do with the field, because for smaller teams, the field isn't going to impact them as much, right? Because they're more direct. For us, we want to keep the ball on the ground and move it, and fields that are in that type of condition are going to hinder kind of our play.
Yeah, and I agree. And Philippe says not even one great team plays big games with only 2 in the midfield. Why are we different? And I think we've touched on this in the past, right? And the game has changed a lot, right? Traditionally in the past, you would see 4-4-2, right? And that was kind of like the cookie cutter. Like most teams played in that formation. Things have changed drastically, right? There's different tactics with the ball, without the ball. Not to say that there wasn't many years ago, but I feel like there's more data today. There's more analysis. There's more visibility and study into your opponent to be able to alternate throughout the game, right? When we have the ball in certain phases of the field, this is how we line up. When we don't have the ball in certain phases of the field, this is how we should line up. And I agree with you. I was listening to the Portuguese pod earlier today with the guys, and some of them said that they don't believe that we have the personnel for this. And I look at it in a few different ways. And Mikey says these injuries have just been brutal. They have, and we'll get to that. And unfortunately, that's part of a season, right? Unfortunately, that's the baggage that comes with a long season. And not to mention the constant international breaks, which we'll have another one in like 3 weeks, which is annoying. But again, keep your comments coming. Join the conversation. We appreciate it. I'll drop a link in the comments in a little bit if anyone wants to jump in and vent and share their thoughts. But when I look at the team, right, and someone said in the Portuguese podcast, right, like changing the formation in the middle of the season is also a red flag. Yes and no, right? Like, one, we've played with the 3-back before, right? We did it earlier this season against Boavista. I can't remember if we tried it in the preseason. I want to say there was one other situation where we went to it in this season apart from Boavista. That's the one that jumps to mind. I don't remember if we went to it last year, maybe once or twice. I get it, right? Like, we're changing from a 4-3-3 or 4-1, however you want to look at, however we want to cut out the typical formation that we use, right? And when I look at our lineup, right, I think we have 3 solid center backs, right? We got Tony, we got Moratu, and we got Otamendi. We have 2 center backs that we have on the bench, Tomás Araújo and João Vitor. Two players, Tomás Araújo had a great season last year at Gil Vicente, right? So he's shown that he can compete at the highest level. João Vitor, we haven't seen enough of him. Unfortunately, he came injured, and then he's been in and out of the team. And then we got wing backs essentially, right? Like given the 3 back, and then if you put Ba and Jurasek, right, as the wing backs, right, doing that whole left and right side, those are guys that, and again, we talked about it with Grimaldo, right? Like I think that in a sense favors both of them, right? Where they both have defensive areas that they can improve on, but they're north to south players, right? Let's get up the field, let's get to the line, let's play crosses in, let's get back, right? And then let's do it again, right? So these guys aren't Ba a little bit more. Jurasek still is green and needs to improve, but Ba has a little bit better footwork in terms of touch of the ball, a little bit more control of the ball, a little bit better coming out of the back, but still needs improvements. Jurasek, you can tell that he struggles to play out of the back, right? And I think moving to a back 3 takes that responsibility away from him a little bit, right? Because he's not so far back, right? And then our center backs can spread out, right? And we can play out of the back with those 3, and someone can drop into the midfield. And our wing backs can now get a little bit further, and they're not put in a position where they're in our defensive third trying to play a give and go or come out of the back, right? And then you end up burning yourself and you're chasing, right? So, and then in the midfield, right? So say we play those 2 out wide, right? That's 5. In the midfield, you play Tino, right? A concrete CDM, right? Who again yesterday showed his ability to be able to intercept passes, to break up play. And you and I have talked about it in the past. I think if he continues to do that, but he also understands his role with the ball, right? And it's like, okay, I got the ball back. Let me get rid of it and play it to someone who can play that pass instead of me trying to play a 30-yard ball.
Right.
I think that's the key piece for him. Then you also have the ability to play Kokshu further up, right, where he has less of a defensive responsibility. You could play João Neves there. And then, so that's 3, 5, 6, and you got 4. So say Kokshu or João Neves in front, and then you got the front 3. Take your pick, right? You got Rafa, you got people with injuries. You got Di Maria, you got Cabral, right? So I think unfortunately there's going to be people that are going to have to be left out, right? And that's the reality of it, right?
It was
but
always going to be the
different.
Case, even with
Correct
4 in the back. It's
exactly right. So there's like, does Auschwitz play on one of those wings, right, instead of Jurasek, right? Because he has the ability to pinch in, he has the stamina to go up and down the line. He's not left-footed. Right. But those are the things that we need to balance out, right? Like who's the opponent? What side do we want to attack on, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't necessarily agree with the idea that we don't have the personnel to play that formation. But I agree with that. I like the idea that we change it. The thing that drives me crazy is he wasn't changing anything. And people were like, this guy has lost it. He keeps doing the same thing. He doesn't change anything. All of a sudden he makes a change and everyone's like, what the fuck is he doing? Why are we playing with 3? Like, what is going on? Like, if we don't make a change, you complain. If you make a change, you complain. So how does he win? There
is no winning. That's the problem. That's the problem with, and we've talked about this separately. That's the problem with our fans, right? Like we're the first to get behind the team when we're playing well. We're the first to rip them down the second anything goes bad, right? The second we have some bad results, we're the ones that are criticizing and waving white flags or white tissues or whatever, asking for the manager to be sacked. Like it's ridiculous. Like we complain that we don't have we can't build a philosophy here, right? And we don't want just one championship. We want to win 10, right? You can't do that when you're fucking changing managers every time you lose 2 games in a row. Like it's ridiculous. You're going to go through these spells where things aren't going to go perfectly to plan. You're going to you might lose some games, but you're going to have to fight through it. And for a manager, he looks at it and guaranteed they've trained this, right? This system. There's no chance that
he didn't just,
there's no chance he just
decide it.
Right. Like, or the week of starts training. Yeah. No, they've been, this has been in his back pocket. They've trained it. It's
maybe not an option he wanted to go to, but
up until this point, it's probably been a break glass in case of emergency type of thing. Like if shit goes really bad in the middle of a game, change to that. We can change to this. And this time he looked at it and he goes, you know what? We've been struggling a bit. Let's change it up a little bit.
Yep.
And for me, if all the competition is laid out, this toss of the Liga or whatever it's fucking called now, like that is the least important one to me.
Correct. I agree.
So if he wants to experiment a little bit, that's the
competition
competition to
do it.
go do it in, because we can do it. And like we saw yesterday, it wasn't perfect, but it was good enough to get a result. I thought there was
There was good
flashes of
moments. Yeah.
I thought there was flash, and then this is amazing thinking about how the field looked. So there was flashes of
Correct.
what we look like in the past, and to me, that's all I want to see. I want to see glimpses of this team connecting and getting back to playing the way we played at the end of last season, right? And it's not going to be. I know it's not going to be identical to what we did last year. We're going to have to evolve a bit, and this could be just one of the evolutions of the team and Roger, right? Going from the typical 4 in the back to a 3-back system, and I think Philip touched on it. Like this could be the formation going forward. Like we might not use it next game, but slowly build into it until he feels comfortable with it, and then run with it.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on this. So Philip says, Philippe, our major problem is trying to play the same style last year without the quality players that left, and I agree with that. Right, like we don't have the same type of player that we had last year to be able to play the same style right now, right? Doesn't mean that we can't get there in 2 months, right? But when you look at it piece by piece, we don't have the same type of player Grimaldo was versus Jurasek today or Bernat. I think technically and foot-wise, Bernat is similar or somewhat closer to Grimaldo, but he obviously doesn't have the pace that Grimaldo has. He doesn't have the ability to get up the field as much and with as much quality as Grimaldo did. But I think defensively he's better than Grimaldo, right? So like those are the pros and cons, right? Jurasek, again, we're going to touch on that. We lost Gonçalo Ramos. Unfortunately, we don't have a striker of his profile, right? A striker that's going to be the first to press, that's going to drop into the midfield and is going to be that workhorse, right? And we complained about him last year, at least I did, right, towards the end of the season, he looked gassed, he looked burnt out. But unfortunately, those are the things that come with that type of player, right? Like if you're constantly chasing the ball, you're pressing hard, those moments are going to come. And we don't have, the closest thing we have to that today is Musa. And I'm a Musa fan. I went to go watch the Sociedad game. He did a lot of dirty work. He was pressing. The amount of times that he gets back into between lines and pokes the ball away from the players constructing out of the back is incredible. Aerial duels. I was talking to Miguel. We were watching the game. He won a numerous amount of aerial duels. But again, he's not the same type of player as Gonçalo Ramos, right? So that in itself, you lose 2 players right there where Grimaldo can construct out of the back, right, which we did last year. And this year we're struggling to do. And then Gonçalo Ramos was the first line of pressure at the front, right? And we don't have an equivalent to him, right? So then you lose that capability up top, right? And we're not going to talk about Enzo because he left in January. But again, we don't have a complete midfielder like him, right? You and I have talked about it before where he could play, he's able to play that 40-yard ball precisely, right, on the dime, right? We don't have a player of that capability today, right? Maybe we have a player that can play a 25, 30-yard ball. I think Kokshu is able to pick out a pass, but again, like he's struggling to adapt. He's had injuries. He's in and out, right? So like those moments are going to come. But I agree. I think us trying to play the same style that we played last year isn't going to work right now. Can it work in 2 months? Maybe. I don't know. But I'm hoping to have a plan to figure that out, right? Yeah. And then he also says 14 million without any defensive quality. And this is a situation that I've struggled with.
We said the same thing with Grimaldo and we all loved him.
But that's the thing, right? And I get where people are coming from, right? Like it was a lot of money. And I think Benfica was put in a situation where the Kerkez deal fell through the cracks. His dad, his agent, whatever you want to call it, made things difficult. And I think Slavia Prague is where he came from. I think they took advantage of that situation, and New Benfica was in a situation where they, it was like, okay, this is our second option. We don't have anyone else earmarked. And they took advantage of that situation. Now, take the price tag out of it, right? And even if we want to look
But
at the
it's also
price tag, right?
also the market. Like the
Correct.
transfers nowadays are so fucking inflated. Like
Correct.
this guy back in the day probably would have gone for 5 or 6, but in today's market, that
Correct.
5 and 6 doesn't happen anymore.
And not to mention they saw Benfica go deep in the competition Champions League last year, right? So
Yeah.
they know they have money,
right.
which makes things difficult. Now, I struggle to, and this is just my way of seeing things, and everyone sees things differently. I'd like to contextualize a lot of these situations. People might look at them as excuses, but I like to look at the whole picture here, right? And I did the same thing with Yaremchuk. I'm going to stand by the way I look at things, and again, people can agree with it, people can disagree with it, but here's a kid who I think 2-3 years ago was playing in the lower divisions. He somehow manages to get himself a place at Benfica, right? So again, new culture, new language, first experience, right? Let's not even compare the weight of the shirt from Slavia to Benfica. Ba went through these growing pains when he got to Benfica, right? And he still has moments where his brain shuts off, right? And there's other players that go through the same thing. And right, he arrives, he gets hurt first game, right? He came in the Supertaça, second half,
Played well
looked
too.
good. Okay. Against Boavista, first game in the league, away crowd. I don't think he was that bad. When Benfica in the second half goes to a back three, he played really well because, again, he had more freedom. Get up and down the line.
Yep.
He's a north to south guy. Gets hurt. He's out for a month, right? Now coming back in, moments here, moments there, and he's struggling again, right? And now you got the pressure on top of you, the price tag on top of you. And then when I went to go watch the Sociedad game, he comes off and fans boo him
And I thought he played well.
in his own stadium. Like, and that's the thing that drives me nuts, right? Like, so like, how do we expect these players to gain confidence and be able to take that next step? And again, I get he was 14 million. I'm not arguing that, right? And that's nor here nor there, right? That's the market, right? That's just what it comes with, right? But when we look at that price tag, I'm just going to remind some people of a few players that struggled when they first arrived to the club. Benfica went and bought Oscar Cardozo in 2008, I believe, around that time. And that time, Benfica paid either 7 or 9 million for him. That was over 15 years ago. When you include inflation, that was a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right? So, and he struggled. How many people criticized him when he first arrived? He was slow. I was one of them. He was slow. He wasn't technical, right? Lo and behold, once he got a hold of everything, he was fucking putting balls in the net. Exactly. Okay. Di Maria struggled when he first arrived to Benfica, right? As a young kid. Gaetan struggled when he first got to Benfica as a young kid, right? Like, there's numerous situations
Darwin.
of
You can go Darwin.
Right, first year, he got a lot of assists, but right? And
Yeah.
it's just like every player, and then people are like comparing it like, oh, Gyökeres from Sporting, first year, hits the ground running. And I get that. Every player is different though, right? Like, it's not as simple as saying, well, the guy down the street, just moved in and he's met all the neighbors and he's accustomed to everyone. Great. But that guy might be a social butterfly, right? But my neighbor is introverted, right? He doesn't talk, so he hasn't really met everyone. Like, I hate that comparison of like, that guy hit the ground running. Why can't every single person is different? Kokshu was voted best player of the fucking Eredivisie last year, right? And he's had a couple good games since he's been at Benfica. He's now got a knock. Who knows how long he's been carrying that? He's had his struggles since he arrived. Again, every player is going to adapt differently and going to take different time. Artur Cabral's another one, right? He's just scored again yesterday. I hope that's the start of him being able to create a snowball here and get some confidence and score. But like, it drives me crazy of like 14 million. He's got no defensive quality. Yes, he's very green, but I also don't think that Benfica bought him with the expectation that he was going to show up and all of a sudden going to be like fucking Alphonso Davies.
No. If you're buying a guy and expect him to plug in right away, you're buying someone older, right?
Correct.
And Benfica looks at it, well, this kid's young, raw talent, right? Unfortunately, the world we live in, Benfica is a seller. So we look at raw talent, who can we mold, and in a few years, you're shipping them off more likely than not for 70, 80, 90 mil. Like that's what the world we live in. So we're not going to, the times of us buying guys that are made already and can just plug in, it's far and few between. Like there's not many
And
times
more
we're gonna go
expensive.
buy. We're not gonna go buy a Pablo Aimar like we did back then, right? Like
Correct.
it's very few chances we have of getting guys like that where they're made, plug them in, and you don't have to worry about them, right? More times than not, we're buying young guys, and it might take them a year or two to
Correct.
develop, and you're gonna see the what Benfica scouts saw on them.
But there may be also situations where they don't adapt. How many times have we seen a player go
Oh, dude.
somewhere and not lock in and leave and go somewhere else and crush it?
Yeah, it
Like
happens.
we've seen that numerous times, right? Pogba was a machine at Juventus,
Yeah,
right? Left how many times and struggled, right? Lukaku was terrible when he first went to Chelsea, left, was a monster, right? Went back, struggled again, right? So it's like unfortunately, there's no guarantee that when you bring someone in that they're going to gel, right?
right.
And we've seen that at Benfica, right? We could be here a year from now and say, put your hands up. We were wrong, right? Jurasek wasn't able to get locked in. He moved on elsewhere. Let's see if he's able to succeed there. Koksu, whoever the case may be, right? Unfortunately, if there was a guarantee that they were going to gel, right? Those transfer prices would be even more
A lot
inflated,
higher.
right? Right, there's less of a risk in that case, right? So I struggle with the idea of like booing our own players, right? Even at the Sociedad game, there was a couple of moments where Trubin had the ball at his feet and he was looking for some lines of pass and no one was really giving him anything and fans were booing him, whistling at that shit just drives me nuts. Like you're in your own stadium, you're in front of your own fans, and I get you're frustrated, the team's not playing well, but like that's not going to help them, especially in the middle of the game.
No, not at all. And I like what drives me nuts is like acting like we're out of the league, acting like the season's over. We're 9 fucking games in. We're 3 points back of first place. Like, yes, the Champions League hasn't gone the way we wanted it to go. But like if you look at the performances in those games, like the Leipzig game, 90 minutes down a guy. Away to like Inter Milan right now is one of the top teams in Europe at the moment. Like
Champions League final.
Same thing with Sociedad. Sociedad has lost, I think, 2 games all season, right? To Real Madrid, and I don't know if it's Barca.
They had a good year.
Madrid.
I think it was Atletico.
Right,
and they had a good year last year.
Like we're not in the easiest group in Champions League. As much as people want to say, "Oh, Benfica,"
it's definitely a harder group. I think a more balanced group than it was last year, despite the big names of PSG and Juventus. I think it's more balanced, right? That pot 4 team, Sociedad was in pot 4,
right?
Like we don't have someone at the level of Maccabi Haifa, for example.
No,
right? Like for me, I thought Maccabi Haifa was a layup, right? Whereas we don't have a layup.
6-0 result.
Correct. So I mean, transitioning into the current state, right? So as you said, Benfica is in second place, 9 games into the season, 7 wins, 1 draw, 1 loss. We lost the first game against Boavista, which unfortunately I was there for. It feels like there's a pattern. Like every game that I go to,
dude, I already told you, every game you've gone through in your seats, they've lost.
I've only been to 1 in my seats, which was
Sporting
the Sociedad game.
Sociedad.
Oh, Sporting, yeah. Sporting we tied. Yeah, Sporting we tied. And then I went to go watch Boavista at the Bessa, and we lost. Last year or 2 years ago, I watched Liverpool, not in my seats at the Sky Blues. We lost.
Yeah.
You
get 2 strikes in your seat. One more, and you might not be able to go again.
I might just have to keep giving them away and not go sit in my seats. So we're 3 points out of first place. Sporting's in first place, 25. We have 22. They have 19 goals scored, 7 conceded. We have 19 goals scored, 8 conceded, right? So in terms of numbers, we're not far off, right? But meanwhile, everyone wants to create this chaos of like Benfica's, the sky's falling and everyone else is doing great. In the Portuguese league or in the Taça Liga, again, we've got a foot and a half in the final 4, which of all the competitions is the least important. In the Taça de Portugal, we just beat Lusitania, which is expected a lower level team. And then we play at home against Famalicão or I can't remember who the other team is. They still have to play their game. And then in the Champions League, obviously we have struggled mightily. We've lost all 3 games. We haven't scored a goal. we've conceded. What did we concede? 1 against Inter, which should have been maybe 3 or 4, to be honest. We conceded 2 against Leipzig, and we conceded 1 against Sociedad. So, looking at the whole picture, how would you, I guess, put into words Benfica's current state today? Is as the title is of this podcast, is the sky falling in your perspective, or not so much?
No. I like the Champions League right now is an uphill battle. That one, I think there's it would have to be a miracle, I think, for us to be able to go through. Mathematically, it's still possible, but I think a lot would have to fucking go our way.
Yeah,
to
I
go
mean,
through.
to begin, we'd have to win out.
Right. And I think, yeah, we would have to win out, and then Sociedad would have to lose
Well,
all their games.
we'd have to win out. No, so we'd have to win out, and Sociedad or Inter couldn't win another game.
Right.
Because we could only get 9, and Sociedad and Inter both have
7.
7. 7. Yeah. They both have 7. So if they win one game, they're through. So we'd have to win out, and we'd need to make sure that one of those don't win again.
Right. So yeah,
and they play each other. They play each other. We play them, right? So in their one game remaining against Salzburg, one of them would have to drop points against them.
Right.
Which isn't, again, isn't, of all the scenarios, that isn't impossible. I think the more difficult piece today, current state, is us winning out.
Yeah. Agreed. I think that the more realistic goal is, I mean, they're going to fight for Champions League, but I think the more realistic goal is probably Europa League, just to stay in Europe and have that extra cash flow coming in. And then for the league, I mean, yes, our performances haven't been there, right? And everyone's frustrated, and I 100% get it. But we're 3 points out. It's 9 games in. Like, I don't think we're at the point yet where we can toss in the towel and just hang things up, right? Like, we're very much in this. As much as people want to hype up Sporting's forward, whatever his fucking name is, Gyro or whatever, like, yep. Good striker, started well. I've seen a few games. That team doesn't look like a team like that. I'm even at the state we're at. I'm not going into those games afraid to play Sporting. Like, I think on paper, the team we have, if they gel right, like, we have a team to win the league, right? And it's just
on paper, I think we're the better team in the league. It's just a matter of putting those puzzle pieces together.
And I don't think, and I think you agree. I don't think we're at the point now where we're like, oh no, this season's done. Like, we can't salvage anything.
No,
like 9 games in, we're 3 points out of first. Like, we're very much still in this. Like, for fans, like, I understand the frustration.
Out of first, and we've already played Porto.
Right.
Sporting hasn't played Porto and hasn't played us.
Yeah. Like, for
and
fans,
they play them soon. They play us next week or 2 weeks, and they play Porto early mid-December, right? So before the end of the year, they'll have played both of us, right? And we'll have played both. So, like, we'll see what that looks like then.
Right.
Go ahead.
I understand the frustration, and I agree with you where, like, I hate the at-home fans booing their own team. Like, I can't fucking stand it. Like, I could see it if it's end of the season and it's been
even
a full
after the
season.
Like, I can accept it after the game, after a bad result, after a bad performance. That's fine, right? And I think it's needed, right? The criticism is needed, right? Because we can't always, like, all right, they tried really hard, let's clap. Like, no, they're grown-ass men. They get paid a lot of money. Fans pay a lot of money to be in the seats, to follow the team, right? So I think criticism is absolutely a must, right? But I think we need to be rational about our criticism and how we do it. And whistling and booing in the middle of the game isn't going to help. Like, think about you're being at work and you're not having a good day, and your colleagues or your boss is just sitting over your shoulder, like, fucking yelling at you. Like, is it going to make it better? Probably not.
No. Probably gonna make it worse.
Yeah. So it's like, that's the thing that pisses me off. Again, if you want to do it after the final whistle and let them know that you're frustrated because of the result, because of the performance, I'm all for that, right? As long as it's rational and you're not disrespecting people and things of that nature. But in the middle of the game,
Yeah,
I just
completely agree.
again, that's not how I see things. I can't wrap my head around that. I get it. Some people are very emotional. They wear their heart on their sleeve. They're irrational. I get it. That's fine. I respect that. I can't see things like that. I can't see life like that. So that piece drives me nuts, and it pissed me off when I was at the Sociedad game.
Yeah, and it's like it's a bit surprising to me where like we're at this point booing our team in the middle of a game when we're, like I said, 3 points out of first. And was it 2 years ago against Sporting we were getting smacked at home?
3-0.
3-0?
That was like 6 years ago.
And we're right.
Chanting.
And we're chanting we're picking the team up.
Yep.
Like that at that game against Sporting, that was our low point. Like we were down and done.
Yeah.
And we were there. The fans were
and
there.
We won the title that year.
Right. And the fans were there to pick the team up, right?
Yep.
Right now, we're not fucking done and dusted.
No.
But yet, for some reason, we're ready to fucking just.
But I think that's also because there's this expectation that gets created, right? And again, not to cut you off, so feel free to just jump in as I share my thoughts here. Is again, like you said, we're 3 points out of first place with 9. Like we're not even a third of the way through the league to begin with, right? And when I contextualize it here, people are talking about like we're playing terrible, we looked like shit. But so if we look like shit, according to some people, we're in crisis according to the media, and we're 3 points out of first place against this, Sporting team who to everyone is fucking, the main title contender and crushing it, right? So if we're that bad and we're 3 points out of first place after 9 games, is it really that bad? Or are the others really that good? I would say no, right? Like if we've been that shit, and when we look at it again, Benfica has had some difficult performances this year. But truth be told, we went on a 7-game winning streak in the league after we lost to Boavista, right? And we had that debacle this past weekend against Casa Pia, which shouldn't have happened. But again, playing average football, which I think we can all agree, average in the sense of far, far from what we performed last year, we're 3 points out of first place, right? And we still depend on ourselves. I can't even imagine if we were 6, 7, 8 points out of first place, what it would be like. But again, we're 3 points out of first place. Again, in Champions League, we've been poor. And I agree with you. I think progression to the next phase is going to take a miracle, right? Again, I think the piece of Inter or Sociedad winning one more game to solidify their place into the next round is the less stressful piece for me. I think us winning out in current state based on how we're playing today is the one that worries me the most. Can we beat any of these 3 teams on our given day? If our roster is there and the team's playing well, I think 100% Sociedad and Salzburg. Inter is a different animal, right? Like again, they're Champions League finalists. I said it last year. For those of you who want to go back and confirm, in my opinion, last year Inter had the best team on paper in the Serie A. They didn't win the title, but I still believe that they were. And this year they've just added talent to that roster. So this year they're better. They were Champions League finalists. Yes, the game's at home. But again, anything can happen. I think Europa League is the most likely for us, which in a sense I think would also potentially allow us to rotate in some of those games, depending on the opponents, and be able to give some rest to certain players, give some players a few more minutes, without having that pressure of like it's the Champions League, right? Where I think in that sense we could almost turn our attention a little bit more towards the season, which in my opinion, the Portuguese League should be the 100% focal point this year, right? Not just because that's what Benfica's normal goals are, but because of the Champions League money that comes with it at the end of this year, right? It's a significant difference. If Benfica wins the title this year, it creates a massive gap between us and our competitors financially. Our 2 biggest competitors today, one, not so much, but both are financially strapped in a sense. And us winning that jackpot would just absolutely derail them. And not to mention, like, everyone invested heavily at the beginning of the season, right? Porto had major financial issues. They didn't sell big. And realistically, if they don't come in first place, right, they just presented their contas a couple of weeks ago, which they dragged out as much as they could to see if there was any news in the media to silence it. But
cover it up a little bit.
They're in the red, and it's not by a little, right? And if they don't win this season, they're going to be in big trouble. Sporting invested heavily, and yes, they've sold a decent amount in the last couple of years. But as you can see from their contas, right, like they're not in the green significantly where you're like, okay, they're going to be okay. So I think the league is extremely important. Europa League is probably the most likely destination, but again, anything can happen over the next couple of weeks, and we'll see how that pans out. But I wanted to look at, like, people talk about like Sporting's much better, right? Like when we look at Sporting's games this season, they beat Vizela 3-2. Vizela is 16th. They beat Casa Pia 2-1. Casa Pia is 12th. They beat Famalicão 1-0. Famalicão is 8th. They tied Braga, who's 5th. They beat Moreirense 3-0. Moreirense is 7th. That's the first game that they won by more than one goal. They beat Rio Ave 2-0, who's 17th. They beat Ferenc 3-2 in a questionable match, who's 13th. And I forgot to mention the Casa Pia game. The first goal they scored was offsides, and the league, the referee association came out after the fact and announced it. And not to say that they wouldn't have won the game anyways, but it changes the game because now Casa Pia is down 1-0 with an illegal goal, right? Again, not saying that Sporting wouldn't have won but that's the factual piece. The other parts are hypothetical. They beat Aroca 2-1. Aroca is 15th. And they beat Boavista 2-0, who's 6th, right? So when we look at, they've played Rio Ave, they've played Vizela, they've played Aroca, they've played Ferenc, they've played Casa Pia. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the bottom 6. Okay. And again, you play your schedule, right? And I'm not taking anything away from that. They've also played Braga, who's a good team. They've played Boavista. We've also played them. And when I look at Benfica's schedule, results, we lost the first game to Boavista. We beat Estrela da Amadora, who is 9th. We beat Gil Vicente, who is 11th. We beat Guimarães, who was 4th and at the time was 1st. We beat Vizela, who's 16th. We beat Portimonense, who's 10th. We beat Porto, who's 3rd. We beat Estoril, who's last. And we beat Casa Pia, who is 12th. So we've played 1, 2, 3 of the bottom 6. Right? So again, look at it how you want. But again, I don't think that the narrative that's being created about like everyone else is great and Benfica's house is on fire, I don't buy into that. That's just my opinion. But
that's papers in Portugal.
Correct. But the thing is, like, fans are also carrying themselves into that wave, which pisses me off. So with that said, right, again, when we contextualize it and look at it in a way that you're kind of looking at the bigger picture and not just looking at numbers, what's your take on all of this commotion around Roger Schmidt? And we had talked about it a little bit offline. There's quite a few fans who want him gone. They think we should find someone else. And I have a number of opinions on this. But what are your thoughts on even the thought of that?
Yeah, to me, it's frustrating, right? Because we talk about wanting to not just win one title. We want to win 3, 4, 5, 6 in a row. Like, we want to dominate the Portuguese league, right? We don't want to just win one and every 4 years or whatever. Like, no, we want to win multiple back to back. Like, you can't do that if you're fucking changing managers every season. Like that becomes very unlikely, right? And I think we've in the past have gone into that, right, where we bring a manager in, we give him a very short leash, things start going a little south, fans get a little upset, we sack him, whole season's ruined. Give the manager next season, he sucks next season, then we sack him. Like it's just a carousel of managers. You can't build a dynasty or whatever you want to call it doing that. Like if you have a sporting agenda and a sporting objective, you need to have someone in place for the long term that can build something and not just win a title immediately, right? Because that to Benfica, I don't think is appealing. I think Benfica looks at it more the bigger picture, right?
But
They
it's
don't
not
want
even just
one.
Benfica. I mean, how many big clubs around the world win successively
None.
without consistency, right? Like you think
Yeah.
about the likes of like PSG tries to buy titles today, right? And they
Constantly
still
changing
are trying to
managers.
chase the Champions League, right? Man United, after Ferguson left, they're struggling for consistency, and look at them now, right? Chelsea, right, struggling for consistency.
Dude, if it
right
was
now.
all and I love the point, and we've talked about this. Everyone makes we spent X number of money on players.
Yeah,
If that was the case, Chelsea's winning the fucking treble for
correct.
the next 10 years.
Spend
just spent
isn't synonymous with
They just
success.
spent $1 billion, £1 billion,
Correct.
and they're in like 11th
Yeah.
right now. Like it
Rui
doesn't.
makes
It
a
doesn't
good point.
work that way.
Ajax, they're in
Yeah.
last place.
They're dead right now. Like just, it happens.
Correct. And they have a pretty good model defined,
System.
right?
Yes.
But like they lost Ten Hag a year and a half ago, 2 years, right? And again, like if Arsenal had sacked Arteta 2 years ago when he was going through a bad phase, they would have been in that spiral
a lot
too.
of people wanted too. Yeah,
I was one of them. I wanted him to be sacked, and those of you that follow us know that I'm a big Arsenal fan. I was one that wanted to see him sacked, and the fact that they rode that out and Arsenal is where they are today, I think is a testament to if you have a plan and you're confident that the person that you've put in place is going to take you to the promised land, there's going to be bad days.
Yep.
There are, but you need to ride that wave and you need to be able to silence the pressure that's coming from the outside, because if you give in to the pressure, you're fucked, because now you're being managed from the outside. And again, there are numerous amount of scenarios that we can put on the table of clubs who are just a revolving door of managers because they want to win now and they don't have
Real
a defined
Madrid
project.
For years was like
correct. And those are clubs that have money, they have the structure in place, right? Barcelona, they went through a rebuilding phase, right? And now with Xavi, they're kind of getting back on their feet. But like, if the big clubs are going through it, and like you said, right, like spend is the thing that jumps out, right? More so for a club like Benfica in the Portuguese league where we're not making as many profits. But spend is not synonymous with success anywhere in any sport, right? You can spend as much money as you want. Doesn't mean you're going to win.
Yep.
Right. And that's just the reality of it. Rui says most Benfica fans know football. Roger is kind of like Bill Belichick. He's a little arrogant and set in his ways and refuses to change. Yes, he's definitely arrogant. I think he's that German mindset. But I also will ask the question of what manager at the top level, what good manager that has longevity and success isn't stubborn? Like, look at them. You got
fucking
guys like Mourinho, Guardiola. I mean, he's got Bernardo Silva playing left back certain games, right? Like, you have the likes of Arsene Wenger was stubborn as fuck. Alex Ferguson, another guy, right, like set in their ways, right? Like there aren't many managers at the top level that aren't stubborn, that don't have that conviction of like, this is how I want to operate. This is how I'm going to make it work. Right. Yep. And there are some that aren't able to make those minor tweaks and they end up falling through the cracks and don't have a successful season. But 9 out of 10 managers that are at the top have a defined game plan, are stubborn in their ways. Yes, they may tweak a thing here or there, but they don't give into the pressure of like, okay, people are pissed off. Fuck it, I'm just going to blow it up and I'm going to change my philosophy and what I stand by, right? I mean, you can argue the case for Ten Hag, right? He's stubborn as fuck. It's just not working out for him right now. but it obviously worked for him at Ajax because he had success, right? So it's just like different scenario, different context, and unfortunately, for some people it works, and some people it doesn't. He said, "Hence, my next Roger has to start reading the game better. I mean, I'm sitting on the couch and I can tell what needs to change in the game." He says, "Hence, my next comment." I agree.
That's a critique. I think we've all touched on it. He's not
Correct.
the best right now at reading the game and making changes in the middle of a game. But there's managers like that. Like
Correct.
there are some managers that can set up the team right, but then the second anything might go bad, like it's hard
Struggle
for
with
them
making a
to
decision.
right, and it's just
And that's not a good thing,
unfortunately
right? But that's what you would hope is you build your staff around you to be able to give you that guidance.
right. Yep. And I
Um,
think back to Roger, I think the the worst thing for him was the way he started last year. Right, going
Correct.
however it was like 30
Guns
games or whatever
blazing.
unbeaten. Like it just
Yeah.
he started off the team started off so well, playing so good that I think it set these expectations for everyone. And the second it goes a little south, everyone just bails and like hands up in the air. Everyone's
Mhm.
worried, blah blah blah. I think if he had last season, I wouldn't say struggled, but just came in and you drop a few points here and there, like it
And I mean, we
happens,
did in
right?
the second half of the season, right? And I think
Right.
we already started to see some people in the second half of the season say like we should have never
Yeah.
renewed. And that's a question that I think is pertinent is in my opinion, I don't know what the renewal has to do with his productivity. Like I don't
Yeah.
see a correlation there, right? Like I get
No.
the renewal, right, where Benfica is tied financially now to a longer contract in the event that something goes wrong. But I don't see the correlation of like, oh, we renewed with him and now like do we think like, oh, I renewed for 3 years, so now I can just fuck around, put my feet up, and if I lose, I lose. If I win, I win. It's not that big. Like
Right.
do we really think that that's what's happened? Like all of a sudden he renews and he doesn't care anymore? Like what again, I can understand the financial aspect, right? Okay, we renewed and now we're tied to a 3-year deal. I can understand that he already had a 2-year deal to begin with, right? We extended a little bit longer, but I also think that that was because of how he was doing and the potential that there was going to be someone that was going to jump in
Yep.
and be like, "Hey, right, we want you," right? So I think that was Benfica protecting themselves, knowing that the risk off the back of it was we're tied to a bigger contract if things go south. But the mindset of people like, oh, it's because the renewal, we renewed with him, and now like everything, like guys, when you work in your day-to-day job and you get a pay increase, so you're just like, oh fuck it, I made it, legs up. All right, I don't have to do anything. That's not. I mean, at least that's not how I operate, or the people that I know operate. But
I
maybe
got
some
my
people
money.
do.
Fuck you.
Yeah, like, oh, I got a $2 increase. All right, I'm just gonna kick my feet up and I'm not gonna do anything. Rui says, I think you guys may disagree with me, but I think our team is soft. So physically and emotionally, the only two that stand out are Johnny Snow and Otamendi, and we need more players like them. But I don't disagree with you, Rui, and I think Bill will agree. Benfica, and we've talked about this on the podcast before. The profile of player that Benfica goes and buys is exactly that: finesse, soft,
Technical.
right? And Otamendi is like the guy that completely stands out of like the opposite of what we are
Yep.
used to buying, right? When you look at guys like or teams like Porto who go and get, South American guys that are grit, that will fucking run through walls, right? Like Benfica historically doesn't have that. You think about, look back at some of Benfica's greatest players, right? Just think about off the top of your head, right? I mean, just think about the 20 that were named on that wall.
Yeah.
Field players: Nelson Semedo, Otamendi. Like, which ones stick out? Aimar, Nuno Gomes, Rui Costa, Simão,
Cardoso.
Gaetan, Cardoso. Uh, who else was on there? João Felix, right? Like, all those guys are just soft, twinkle toes, joga bonito, right? Finesse players. They're not guys that, like, when you think about teams like Porto and the grit they've had, guys like Uribe, guys like Freddy Guarin, Lucho Gonzalez, right? Like guys that are just like going to dig in. Bruno Alves, Jorge Costa, like all those guys. Those are
It's
guys
just
that
in
are
their
going to dig
DNA.
in.
Yeah.
Correct. And that's their DNA. And he said, we need another Fejsa. He's on our bench.
Yeah.
And he's on our
Calma.
bench, Tino. I think Tino is miles away from what Fejsa
Yeah.
was. Who knows? I mean, he's young. He could get there. But I agree.
And-
Fejsa was another one of those guys that like didn't fit the mold of what we're used to.
Yep. If like Feja won the ball, he was very good defensively.
Correct.
Sucked going forward, but he knew it.
It was like a hot potato for him.
He got rid of it as quickly as fucking
Correct.
possible. And like I've said in the past, Tino is very good at winning the ball back, being in the correct spot defensively. My issue with him is when he tries to be that 8, right? Playing those 40-yard balls, playing those through, like it's just not in his game. Like get the ball, get rid of it.
Yep.
Right. Feja was very successful at doing that. And I think if Tino can understand that role and be okay with that role, 100% he could fit into this team, no problem. It's when he starts trying to play the balls that Enzo was playing, right? The balls that Cooksa can play, those 20, 30-yard balls in behind the defenders.
Right.
It's just...
And he didn't have to do that much last year because he had Enzo and then he had Chiquinho who played out of his skin.
Yeah.
And this year, I feel like he's been more exposed because Chiquinho's not playing out of his skin.
Yeah, Chiquinho's another...
Yeah, and Coxu struggled. But again, like he hasn't played consistently. Rui says we need to play with the Trinco Reyes and team is the only one. Yeah, he's the only one on our team that can play that position. It's just a matter of... I also don't think that he can play in a midfield too because he doesn't have the pace, right? And we saw in certain games where it's basically like a highway, right? Like they break that first line of pressure. João Neves is chasing out wide or steps up, and now Tino's chasing someone. Like we can't have Tino chasing, running backwards, right? We need to have Tino facing the play, being able to occupy space, being able to anticipate, and being able to break up play. If you got Tino running 15, 20 yards after a player you're fucked. Like, you're fucked. And our center backs are fucked too, because now they got guys running at full speed straight at them, and they're going to expose the shit out of them. So he says a 4-1-3-2. And I mean, we've technically been not a 4-1-3-2. I would say it's probably more of a 4-2-3-1, right? 9-10, yeah. 4-2-3-1. But again, like it depends. It's just a matter of how you want to cut it and how you want to make it look on a I mean, we've played with 4-2 with say Tino and João Neves or Coxu, and then 3 being, the Rafa, the Di Maria, and the Neres, and then Musa up top or Artur Cabral. So I mean, we've played some sort of version of something similar to that. But again, I think with the personnel that we have, playing with 2 in the midfield is just too risky against top opposition because they fill the midfield. And when you got guys chasing 15, 20 yards backwards.
I mean, we saw it again, Inter and Real Sociedad, right? Those 2 games, the Sociedad game was probably the worst. We looked, but they play with 3 in the middle, and we saw it that we were just outnumbered. And when we lose ball in transition, one of the 2, Tino or João Neves, is getting sucked out to cover out wide, which then only leaves 1 in the midfield. And when they have 3, like they just had acres of space, and that's the problem with the formation right now.
Yeah, and I think the personnel also doesn't help. And again, this is like, and these are criticisms to the coach and to the direção as well, right? Like, I don't want it to come off as like Roger Schmidt is doing great things and he's not at fault for it. Like, he is 100% at fault for a variety of things: in-game management, being able to figure out our base 11, which again, I will also say in our base 11, between injuries, international breaks, right? Like, I feel like we haven't had a string of 4, 5, 6 games where everyone's healthy, where we can actually like build some sort of fluidity and some understanding there, right? Like Jurasek was hurt, then Ba was hurt, Coxu's had a knock, right? So like, I feel like there's been people, the Musa was out, Artur Cabral was still getting ramped up, but Renat wasn't fit yet, right? So like, I feel like we've had situations where it's like 1 or 2 pieces are missing and we're not able to build cohesion and some consistency there. But I think with the current state of the personnel, I think that's why I think that 3 back helps, because you can then push guys like Di Maria up, you can push guys like Neres up and have less responsibility to defend. Right. Whereas right now they're having to come back. Right. And it's, I mean, you don't want Di Maria running back 40 yards to have to defend, because he's not going to have the energy to go forward. Right. And Neres, I mean, I witnessed it firsthand and I've been talking about it before. There are situations where he does come back and help, but there were situations in that game against Sociedad. There was one specifically just before he came out where he lost the ball in our offensive third and like hesitated to come back, because he lost it and stopped and then realized like we were completely outnumbered and just gunned it back. But like that's like the fact that he had to think about it, like, okay, I'm not gonna go, oh shit, I have to go. Right.
Yep.
It's like, and those are things that you don't want players like them doing. And I think in the current state, playing that 3-back almost protects us from that situation. So he says other teams watch video how we play and figure out how to counter against us. Roger has to change something at midfield. Agree. I think that's what we're talking about. Is there's some tweaks, there's some changes there, but I think we agree that the sky, again, and I'm speaking for myself, the sky isn't falling in my perspective.
And I've seen this my bad. I've seen this type of comment a few times, right? Where it's like, well, teams have our videos and they figured us out. You can say that for 90% of the teams, right? Like
Correct.
Pep, he plays one fucking way, and that is it.
Yeah.
And he's been at City for 4 years now. You don't think people have figured it out? No, like you
6,
can't
I think.
figure it out. Like if it's clicking and you're
because
playing
there's
well,
minus. Correct. He makes minor tweaks
right?
here and there. Correct. But his the
Exactly.
foundation of his approach
Is the
is
same.
consistent.
It's
Correct.
the same thing with Xavi at Barca, right? It's the same
Correct.
foundation and the same way you want to play. And
Yeah, like
it's
you can't
easy to
reinvent
say,
the wheel every season.
no. And people
Like
people said it about the Barca and the Spain, right? The Spain national team, right? Like
yeah.
the tiki taka. Oh, they figured it out. They figured it out. Bullshit, you fucking figured it
Dominated
out. Like, you
world
kidding
football
me?
for like 8 years.
Yeah, like it's easy to say, oh, someone can just figure it out by video, or just because you play the same style from year to year, they're gonna
Correct.
figure out. No, it's if things are going well, no one's fucking saying anything, right? It's they haven't figured anything out, and that's what it's been like at City, right? They've been able to just maintain it. Problem is, right? Last year, João Mario probably had one of his better seasons of his career. This
And
year,
he's not started
struggled.
off well.
Right. This year struggled.
I mean, let's look
midfield-
at our team as a whole, right? Like starting at the back, the goalkeeper situation, we've had N conversations about this. Whether you're an Audi fan, whether you're a Tubin fan, it's indifferent. I think that we're going to have some growing pains there. I think we see potential, but again, we saw a goal this weekend against Casa Pia, which is frustrating to concede. I think it was a mix of misfortune and lack of experience. Looking at the back, right? Our center backs, I think Otamendi's our most consistent performer. Antonio Silva, I think, has had mistakes this season. He had some mistakes last season.
He's come back to earth.
Correct.
Kid
so
was on
again,
cloud
he's
9.
not
He's come back
exactly
to earth a little bit.
So he has his moments. Our outside backs, I think, speaks for itself, right? We haven't had any consistency on the outside backs, regardless of who's there. Even Fred, who basically was like the next best thing since sliced bread last year. This year has almost, in a sense, also come down to earth, right? I think he played out of his skin last year, and this year playing in multiple positions, I think, has hurt him a lot.
I was literally just about to say that. I think he's played well in certain spots, but I think it's hard for him to find consistency when he's playing
against Sociedad. He played 3 against Sociedad. He played from the left positions,
left back, center mid, right back.
Yeah,
like it's
tough.
hard to build on
and
it
then,
when you're
and then our midfield
place.
Right. Let's just look at some of the key figures there. João Mario, we already talked about, right? Hasn't hit his stride in terms of what he performed last year, and he was a pivotal piece to last year's title. João Neves, we only saw a little bit of him last year, but he's been good this year. But again, he also has his flaws, right? Positionally, awareness, he gets stretched out sometimes, right? And again, that's lack of experience. It's going to come with time. But I know that Benfica fans get really hyped up. He's a Seychelles player. He's young. He's passionate. He's got grit. He always looks to get involved.
Ethic.
Correct. And I think sometimes it blinds us in the mindset of looking at it, taking a step back and looking at it and being rational, right? Like, yes, he works his socks off. He's had some great performances, but when you look at it as a whole, there are situations where he gets sucked out, where he shouldn't be getting sucked out, right? And exposes certain things. Tino, he was pivotal last year. He fell out of the 11 again. You and I have talked about this offline. I'm convinced that there's something there. There has to be something there. It happened with JJ. It happened with Bruno Lage. he hasn't been able to consistently make himself a number one name on the starting 11 consistently, right? He always manages to go with Bruno Lage, someone who knew him well, went through a half a season. People complain, oh, it's because of Weigl. If you go back and look, he fell out of the 11 before Weigl even started.
Yep.
So, like, let's not blame it on Weigl. You can, if you want, and it makes you feel better, you can blame it on Weigl. But if you go back and look at the games, which I've already done, he fell out of the 11 before Weigl even came in. Last year, pivotal piece at the beginning of the season. The second half of the season, towards the end, he all of a sudden doesn't become an option, right?
Yep.
This year, he doesn't start in the team again. He's come in. He's had some moments where he's looked good against Portimonense. He looked good. He looked good yesterday against Aroca. But again, I'm convinced that there's something else there, right? Whether it's work ethic and practice, I don't know. But for me, there has to be something there, or I think there's something there. I could be right. I could be wrong. I don't know. But it just seems like a pattern. Kokshu has struggled to find consistency. He's had a couple good games. He's had a couple of mediocre games. But again, it's an adaptation. Di Maria has probably been our bright star in terms of output, but I would also say that he's had some games where he's been subpar.
Horrendous.
Right? But unfortunately, but he's one of those players that, like, in one moment to the next decides a game.
Yep.
Right? He could be having the shittiest game, and then, one play, curls one in the back corner or hits a free kick like yesterday, right? So, like, from a productivity and stat sheet perspective, he's been our bright spot. From a performance perspective, I would also say that he's been inconsistent.
Yep.
Ned's same thing. Last year he was gun blazing, automatic starter. Towards the end of the season, he kind of fizzed out. I think he's struggling to find form now. He's hurt. He's not going to be back till beginning of the year. So who knows when he'll be at his level. Ged's coming back from an injury. Another one, Cabral, getting adapted. Musa, he scored some goals, but he's been up and down. Right. So, like, as we go through this list, like
Rafa's been in
Rafa,
his no
Rafa
show
started.
phase.
Yeah, Rafa started guns blazing at the beginning of the season, and now, like, the last 4 or 5 games, he's been, like, falling on the ground looking for fouls, which is what he starts to do when he's in that phase of, like, not playing well, which fucking drives me nuts. So like, we just went down the list of a number of players, right? And, like, we could probably pick out 2 that have, like, consistently played at a top level, right? And it's tough to find cohesion, to find fluidity, and find consistency in a team of 11 when you have 7 of those players struggling for consistency and struggling for form and struggling for confidence, right? And again, the coaching staff has some part in that, but the players also have a big part in that as well, right? Like,
We're always, as fans, we're always so quick to blame the coach for everything, and
correct.
I think the players have to take some responsibility of it as well.
100%.
It's not just the manager.
Correct. The coach has to give you the right game plan and the idea of what needs to be done in the game, but the coach isn't the one that's out there making bad passes. The coach isn't the one that's not running, right? And I think against Casa Pia, we saw that the team went into a lull. They tied the game, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, we remember how to play soccer. Everyone was running. We created a couple opportunities, and it's like, is it the coach's fault that you guys were just fucking around for 60 minutes?
Yep. Like, that's, to me, I've never played for a manager or known a manager that their game plan was, all right, we'll score in the first 20 and then relax for the next 60.
Yeah, and just hang out. Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
No, it doesn't work. Like,
and I get
so,
that
like,
the coach can do some things on the sideline to, like, hype them up. But again, those are just words.
Right.
Like,
it's then on the players to
correct. So I think there's some responsibility there. Rui says we need to insist with Musa. He's a hard worker, but Rogers so quick to pull him. I think Rogers leaned on him a lot more than I thought he would. But unfortunately, he got the red card at the beginning of the season, and then he's been sick for the last, like, week and a half, so that kept him out of the games. But I think I agree. I like him. I was a fan of him last year. He had a good season with Boavista the year before. I like his characteristics. Again, he's not a Gonçalo Ramos, but I think he's different from Artur Cabral, for example. So I think that between the two of them, you have 2 different types of game plans that you can play. It's just a matter of, again, getting that consistency, getting those games, 4 or 5 games in a row where you're playing regularly, and getting that confidence. And hopefully it kind of all just pieces together, and we can get this team firing on all cylinders. And I think over the next couple of weeks, I think is going to be telling for us.
Yeah.
To wrap things
I
up
think
here, Bill. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
just real quick, like you touched on it, the consistency. I think Roger needs to find his base 11.
Correct. But in order for
And
him to do that, he needs
and
the
like
players to be
stick
available.
and like right, but we need to find it and stick to it, and not every week be a different striker, and every week be a new pairing in the midfield. Like
Correct.
we need to get some consistency in who the lineup and get some fluidity with these guys.
I agree, because again, I couldn't give you what our base 11. I can give you what I think our base 11 is, but we haven't seen that base 11. And
No.
I think there's a number of factors that contribute to that.
Yeah, like I could make our best 11 from on paper,
Correct.
but fucking
correct. But we haven't seen
injured right now.
opposed to last year where it was like you knew who he was going to play because he had those defined 13, 14 players, and you just knew. And I think, and again, maybe having a larger squad maybe makes things more difficult, right? To be able, I got to leave this guy out. I don't want to leave that guy out, right? We've obviously seen that he doesn't like to leave Freddie out. Whether that's good or bad, I think it's bad in certain situations, especially since his form, he probably does need a break, right? He's the only player that's played every game for us.
Yep.
But again, I think it just comes down to a confidence thing. There's like, if he doesn't play, who am I going to put there? I don't have as much confidence, right? So again, those are things that like we can put on the coach, right? Because he needs to find that confidence. If he has those players there, it's obviously, I'm assuming, because he wanted them there, right? I'm assuming that the leadership isn't like, oh, we picked this guy, here you go, make it work, right? I would hope that's not how the clubs run, especially by someone who was a player at the top level, who was in the locker room of some of the biggest clubs in the world, or with some of the biggest players in the world. So, and some of the biggest managers of the world. So you would hope that that's not the case how they're running the team. Quickly to close off here, next couple of weeks, want to get your thoughts on how we think we're going to land. We've got this weekend, we got Shops, your hometown. Benfica will be in town. Stadium, or the Benfica tickets are sold out. So as always, I'm sure there'll be a big turnout for Benfica fans there. We then go to Spain to take on Real Sociedad in a game that's, again, another must-win. We play at home against Sporting, and we finish the month off at home against Inter Milan. How do you see this next month playing out?
Unfortunately, I think we probably end up 2-2, right? Like I think the Sociedad and Inter game are the big tasks for us, right? Like, and just looking at the state of the team right now, I find it the Sociedad game, I think, is the one that is probably the closest to us to possibly getting a result.
Yep.
But away is going to be very, very tough. Inter is just a beast right now.
But if Inter beats Salzburg next week, they potentially rotate some players for us,
right? But they rotated guys against
Salzburg, yeah, and they did win, solid. But they almost got themselves into some trouble.
Like that Inter team has some depth to
Correct.
them.
They do.
But yeah, those two games are tough tasks. I think the Sociedad game is probably the closer one that we could potentially steal some points. I don't know if we can get a win away, but I think the Shavs game must win. We just had a good performance, got a good result. I think keep that going, right? Get another good decent performance in, get a good result. Kind of get the fans back on track a little bit.
The Shavs team that's absolutely struggling,
and they concede goals like fucking crazy. So
yeah, they've conceded 26 goals. They just lost 5-0 against Vitória. They had beaten Gil Vicente 4-2. They beat Aroca 2-0. They tied still at 2-2. They lost 4-1 against Shops. Yeah, they've got 26 conceded, 12 scored. So they average 1.3 goals scored, and they average over 2 goals conceded. If we can't go there and win, we're in trouble.
Yeah. And then the Sporting game, that's a big one, right? That's regardless of what we look like, regardless of standings or what time of the season it is. Like, it's early. yes, but it's Sporting. Like those are the games where you want to win.
Form
No matter
normally
what.
goes out the window in those games as well.
I was about to say, like typically the on form team is the one that doesn't win. Like,
Yep.
which so we'll see. I guess if it plays into our favor, but those are games that, regardless of form, regardless of standings, regardless of all of it, those games are like above it all, and you want to win those games, right? And um,
And those are the
I
games
find it
that can
hard,
basically change the season.
right? Like if we go and get a good result against Sporting,
Yep.
that's fucking regardless of how we looked against Sociedad, regardless of whatever, like
Yep.
get another win. If we were to get another win against a rival, then Rogers 2-0 against the two other top teams in the
The
league, right?
season.
Like
Yeah.
it can change things, right? And again, a win against Sporting gets a lot of fans back on the train, and
No, I
a
don't
lot of
want
fans
them on the
happy again.
train. I don't want
Yeah,
them on the train. Listen, if you're gonna be irrational and you're
dude.
gonna want to blow things up after 9 games in the season and we're 3 points out of first place, like I don't
I
want you
get it.
back on the train. Again, but
Train's gonna be a lot emptier.
that's the train that I want to be on, right? Is
Fuck it,
the
a lot more booze for us. Fuck
I
'em.
know I know sometimes it's easy to be irrational, and when I walked out of the stadium after the Sociedad game, I heard a lot of people saying just things. It's just like, I get you're in the heat of the moment and it's frustrating, but it's like, can we just take a step back and like look at like who are you going to go get at this point in the season
Yeah, if
and
you're
expect
talking
positive
stocking a
things out of it,
manager, yeah, like
right? Like who's going to come in right now
yeah,
and like and you feel like they're going to be able to just turn everything. Like, how did that work out with Nelson Verismo?
yeah.
Like, did we get better? Nope.
No, but I would say, and a lot of people would say that one was a must,
He
right?
always
Like
says
when we did
Petit.
it,
Listen, Petit's doing good at Boavista, but again, like
I don't know
coaching,
if he's a top
I don't know if
tier,
he's
top
ready,
club
but I don't know if
manager.
he's ready for that jump. That's a big
Yeah,
jump, right? I get he's done good things at Boavista. They have salaries that haven't been paid, right? And like the fact that he's able to get these guys playing well is commendable.
yeah,
But I think that also speaks volumes for the character in that locker room, right? Like there's no
yep.
coach. I don't care how good of a coach you are. If there's no character in that locker room of players that like, I'm not getting paid, right? I don't care what words you say to that locker room. They're going to be like, fuck you. I ain't running.
And there's some managers that can get the most out of lesser squads, right? And then when they're
Correct.
given
Bigger
talented
squad, they
players,
can't.
they can't do it. Like it's just there's some managers that aren't built to deal with egos and talented play. Like they're better off with playing the underdog card, right? Like
Correct.
we're the underdogs, we fight and scrap for everything. And Petit to
Yes.
me seems like that type of manager where he was that type of player. He was a fucking
Correct.
scrapper.
Yep.
And I think the feeling I get is that's the type of manager he is. He does well to motivate the players, and I just don't know if he would be the type of manager that could deal with a squad full of talent and
Yeah.
egos and all that shit. Like I just don't know if he could deal with it.
Correct. And again, I think he's done great things. I would be interested to see him at like a next level club, like a Guimarães,
Guimarães
for
or a
example, right?
Braga,
Like or a
yeah,
different, someone that has a little bit more capabilities to see how he does. Because again, there's no guarantee of you did well at a smaller team, right? If that was the case, then guys like Sam Allardyce would be, winning championships with some
oh,
of the big teams in England
exactly.
because, right, like they did a decent amount with small
Roy Hodgson,
portions, right? Yeah, like they save people from getting relegated, and right, but like unfortunately, but again, I'm not saying that Petit isn't a good coach or he wouldn't be a good fit for a top team. It's just a matter of, right, like we saw the situation with Bruno Lage, right? Things can go really fast up and they can come just as
really
fast
fast.
down, right? And
Yep.
Lage was destined for success and the next best thing to come out of Portugal. And listen, all I'm going to say is I appreciate what he did for us in that title. He played some really good football, but that's also the guy that just walked away from his coaching job in Brazil with a 10-point lead in first place because the fans were contesting him and unhappy with the type of football that they were playing, right? So like different situations, different environments, different context. just because you got a lot of good players doesn't. I mean, count the number of coaches that went through PSG and couldn't win the Champions League. Pochettino took Tottenham
Dude.
to the Champions League final, and he couldn't get PSG to win the title with the players that they had. Right. So again, money, spend, talent isn't synonymous with winning all the time. Rui says in the next 5 years you'll see Petit as a head coach at Benfica. Write that down. We'll make a note of that. Episode 154.
Dude, I would love it because he club legend. Like to me, he's a club legend. Like he played so well those years at Benfica, and I loved him. So I would love to see something like a guy like that come back and manage the team. I just
don't see it happening.
I just don't know if he's that type of manager that can
if he
manage
takes if he makes a jump in the next like 2 years, I'd be curious to see. But I would tell you this. I would say in the next 5 years, we're probably more likely to see Ruben Amorim on Benfica's bench than we are to see Petit. Write that down, Rui. Mark that in your sticky notes. And whoever's right, if you're right, I'll send you tons of swag. You can use my tickets when you go.
I was about to say, give them tickets.
If you live in the States, or if you live across the pond, whenever you're over there, just let me know. You can use my tickets to watch the game. Even if he doesn't go there, if you're ever over there and want to catch a game, just shoot me a message and we can arrange something. That's it. So again, a lot of topics to cover. A big month coming up for Benfica that's potentially going to define and shape the next. He's in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. All right, so you're not too far from us. We're in Massachusetts. We're not too far. But yeah, if you ever go across the pond, as a thank you for being a consistent listener and contributor to our podcast, send us a message, and we can get you some tickets on us as a thank you. Yeah, a lot to cover. We covered a lot. There's a lot of, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of opinions after the fact. If you're tuning in after the fact, whether on the video or the audio version, please give us your thoughts, leave us your comments, and also don't forget to like, share, subscribe on the various platforms. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button, let us know that you're there. We'll be back next week after the Chaves game. The game against Sociedad is Tuesday. Do you know? Is it Tuesday or Wednesday? The 8th. What day is the 8th? 7 days from now, so it's Wednesday.
It's on a Wednesday. Yeah.
So maybe we'll do this on Wednesday evening instead of Tuesday, so we can capture both games. So we'll be back next Wednesday evening to recap Chaves, hopefully a W, and Real Sociedad, hopefully a W. Some of the boys will be in Spain for that game. So if you're watching on TV, look for our big flag that will be there. Bill, as always, a pleasure having these conversations. Those of you who tuned in, thank you for contributing to the conversation. We'll be back next week. As always, Viva Sport Lisboa Benfica. Good evening.